Ravaging winds and plummeting temperatures raise the stakes for the Coast Guard.
The winds were just howling horrible, scary horrible.
In Kodiak, blinding weather and turbulent gusts bear down on a helicopter crew.
Right now, the way the weather is, there's no way we're getting in there.
This guy needed us because he was going to run out of his oxygen supply.
When a boater's skiff gets swamped, the Coast Guard scours the freezing shoreline to save him.
It's been 2 hours. The Patrick caught up with him. He could be in a pretty severe condition.
And the team takes to extreme heights to reach a hunter stranded in the mountains.
He's like up on like one of the highest peaks. My fear would be to blow him off. I think I see him.
The vast Alaskan wilderness, a place where beauty is cloaked by danger. Here, every day, the highly trained men and women of the U.S. Coast Guard risk their lives to save others. America's deadliest waters are protected by Coast Guard Alaska.
Did you get the lowdown up?
I did. This has been going on for a while. Hopefully the guy should be littered. We're planning on landing, I guess. IST2, Rob Emily. I'm an aviation survival technician at Air Station Kodiak. The SAR alarm went off for a mid-70s patient with a shortness of breath. The urgency to get him airlifted that night was because the clinic was running low on their oxygen supply.
Yeah, we'll land, transfer him, and then take him up to Homer, I think is the plan right now. Weather here is pretty terrible. Weather there, they're saying it's better. The life flight declined the case, so who knows whether it actually is in there. Lieutenant Commander Jake Smith, aircraft commander for the MH-60s. They had limited supplies of oxygen in the remote town, so the surgeon decided to launch us out to go pick the guy up in Port Graham, Alaska, and get him to Homer where we could get a life flight to pick him up. We took off out of Kodiak just before sunset to go up to Port Graham.
All right, troop, ready for takeoff. Ready for takeoff. If things get ugly with the visibility or anything, we can just return to the ramp.
My name is Lieutenant Jim Cooley. I'm an H-60 helicopter pilot at Air Station Kodiak. En route to the SAR case, the weather was in and out, more bad than good. Right about the time that the sun was setting, we punched right into the clouds. It's pretty much reduced visibility. 0, 0 is what we say. Literally, the clouds were from a very high altitude all the way down.
All right, guys, we are on the low vis route.
Like a little bit of surface fog up ahead.
So we punched in the clouds, and right about then, the turbulence really picked up. At one point, we're moving to the side, 70 degrees off from what the aircraft's nose is pointing.
Yeah, you can't even see long enough. And then it just looks darker up ahead. I guess we should use this time to goggle up.
I am AMT2 Travis Gardner. I'm an E5 in the U.S. Coast Guard, and I am a flight mechanic for the H-60. We're coming around the corner of the peninsula, and we were expecting the weather to get better with the winds, and it's just completely socked in, 0 vis. The winds were just howling.
Enter the lake is going to be really bumpy, guys.
Roger. It's super dark, so I'm going to descend down 250 feet just so we're a little bit closer to the water.
The vis is significantly lower up here just due to the precipitation right now.
It's very common for the weather to be fairly decent here, and en route or at your destination for the weather to be horrible, scary horrible.
So dark we can't even see the mirror frames to see if we got icing.
Yeah, we're about 5 miles away right now, and it is not looking great.
The visibility drops even more.
Yeah.
We're looking at the radar, we're looking out the window, we're looking at the radar, we're looking out the window, and the whole time we're not able to see anything.
And Rob, you can check in with Sector. Let them know I'm not going to push it. Business 0-0 in the bay. We are en route Homer now. We discussed it over as a crew and decided that it would be in the best interest of everybody if we went up to Homer where the weather was better and waited out. If you can inquire to the condition of the patient, see if they know. Plan on just getting gas in Homer for the time being and finding out what they want to do from here.
All right.
Right now, the way the weather is, there's no way we're getting in there.
Okay.
We had to make that tough decision to split and head to Homer for gas and regroup.
not a whole lot we can do.
I think that might be Homer.
Oh, yeah. Ah, thank goodness. More turbulence, guys.
Ready for approach.
Ready for approach.
So we headed to Homer and shut down there to wait out the weather. We were there approximately 45 minutes, and then we took off to do another assessment.
If everything works out all right, about 20 minutes till we're on deck, Port Graham.
Roger that, sir.
It looks, at least up here, way better.
Yeah.
We got confirmation that this guy needed us because he was going to run out of his oxygen supply between 4 and 7 a.m. If we're getting told that he needs us, then we're gonna do whatever we can to get there.
So far, so good. So this will be a no hover landing with some forward airspeed.
Roger. 1 o'clock, a ways off. You see those lights?
Yeah.
There are some towers coming up. I can't tell how high they are, but.
Oh, yeah, there are. Wow.
Is that one of the towers right there at 3 o'clock?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, there's 2 right there that aren't illuminated at all.
And that's not charted, huh?
No, that would have killed us.
We all kind of were peering through the precipitation at what looks like this tower. Quick reference, like, nah, don't remember that from last year, and nor is it on the chart. If we were flying in towards the runway and all of a sudden went into the clouds and we couldn't see anything, our bailout option would have been climbing to the left, which is exactly where that tower was. So, fortunately, the second time, the visibility was such that we could see it about a mile or a mile and a half away. What kind of freaked us out is, had we gone in with this 0-0 viz, I mean, that's a bad situation gone worse.
Pretty good landing spot there.
Roger.
And Rob, don't rush him, but if we can make it minimum time, I don't want to get stuck here in the weather again if it comes back in.
Roger that, sir.
Somebody could have told us about those freaking towers. That upsets me. Say, hey, we got 300-foot towers just off the other side of the runway.
Yeah. So Rob is back out. Yeah.
All right, so he's in a wheelchair, and wheel him out here. He can sit in my seat.
Roger.
The patient was ambulatory. He was pretty stable, so I was able to talk to him.
Patient in the cabin. Servers in the cabin.
Roger.
And the guy with the wheelchair is cleared out.
All right. You guys are ready for the takeoff?
Yeah, buddy.
How's he feeling back there, all right?
He looks good, sir. He's pretty stable. I'm just going to put O2 on.
We are almost there.
After we left Port Graham, we quick transit back to Homer, like 20 minutes. Guardian flight was on deck waiting. We loaded him up. They were on their way to Anchorage, probably inside of 10 minutes. We just headed back to Kodiak, and that was it for the night.
Well, fellas, this is a pleasure.
Yes, well done.
A lot of challenging flying.
Yeah. Friggin' towers, man. Imagine. I don't even want to think about it. I really don't even want to think about it.
This SAR case was a good example of the environment that we fly in Alaska. Because on paper, you know, you present the SAR case like, oh, you're taking off, you're landing, you're picking a guy up, you're bringing him to somewhere else. Doesn't sound like a big deal. And it turned out it was a very big deal. So, absolutely, this is a testament to being vigilant in the aircraft, especially in these remote areas with pretty bad weather, and that paid off. You know, we didn't put ourselves in a really horrible situation that first time, and we saved a guy's life.
Good work, guys. Not bad. Not friggin' bad. Not bad. Not bad at all.
Coast Guard has received a report of a 12-foot skiff washed ashore with one person on board.
We had heard that the person might be wet and it was very cold outside, so we rushed down to the hangar as fast as we could.
Steve, talk to me. You're probably thinking hypothermia?
Yeah, definitely hypothermia, and then whatever injuries he might have sustained, you know.
Whenever someone is hypothermic, especially up here in Alaska in the winter, it's definitely a life or death situation.
Is this his boat right here?
Yep, that's it.
That is a sweet headband.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, it's great out today. The rain finally let up. It's a beautiful day. So we got to hike up to top of Mount Eyak over in Cordova. The weather in Alaska can be really unpredictable. We just had a case where it was the biggest issue for us. So when it does get nice outside, we're out there and enjoying it.
It's popping.
I don't know.
Should we go up to the TZ and see if we can see the chopper? Oh, this is pretty awesome. The hike up was beautiful. The scenery is great. We got the sun shining on the snow-capped mountains. Eagles flying behind me right now. And we just got to see our boys in the helicopter just do a hoist and a sling load. So we got up here to the mountaintop and we're about to ski down.
I've been skiing for most of my life, but mostly at resorts. Everything's been groomed and taken care of. Here, you hike up the mountain by yourself. You can ski down as much as you want, but you gotta climb up if you wanna get to the bottom again. It is a lot of work. So much better than being on a treadmill for the day.
We're about to shred some gnar. I wanna try to get some steep, fresh pow.
Morale is high in the Smith-Cooley duo right now. Epic gnar.
All stations, all stations, all stations. The Coast Guard has received a report of a 12-foot skiff washed ashore with one person on board.
Lieutenant David Wright, one of the H-60 pilots here at Air Station Kodiak. 9:45, the pagers went off saying that there was a 50-year-old male who somehow gotten in the water off his 12-foot skiff and made it to shore. 2 hours had gone by and they hadn't heard from him.
If I understand right, we're just going to do a shoreline search.
That's it. And there is a fishing vessel, the fishing vessel Seldovia. They apparently either know this guy or this guy is off of his boat. I'm not sure which one. They're the ones that called the SAR in.
What's that?
Lieutenant David Shook, I'm the operations duty officer for the air station this evening. We managed to wash ashore. Cell phone still works, so we ended up calling the fishing boat Seldovia. They were gonna come and help out. The guy never called back and they could not get a hold of him, so they ended up calling the Coast Guard sector in Anchorage and asking for our assistance. He's on shore somewhere in this vicinity, not sure exactly where, but probably within a 5-mile stretch of beach is what they've narrowed it down to. Once they pick the gentleman up, he will be delivered to a higher level of care here in Homer, Alaska.
My name's Lieutenant Commander Jim Harkins. I'm an H-60 helicopter pilot at Air Station Kodiak. We had heard that the person might be wet and it was very cold outside, so we rushed down to the hangar as fast as we could.
Crew 4 ready for takeoff. We're ready for takeoff. All right, goggles up.
It was a bit cold, but we had clear skies, pretty good visibility, climbed up to approximately 3,000 feet, I believe.
I wish they would have called us a couple of hours ago. I hope he's going to be all right.
On our way up to the first thing that kind of goes through your mind is what is the individual encountering right now? If we know he's wet, what is he wearing? And we know it's minus 0 degrees Celsius outside, so we knew hypothermia was going to be a big deal.
Steve, talk to me. What are you thinking? You're probably thinking hypothermia? Yeah, definitely hypothermia, and then whatever injuries he might have sustained, you know.
Whenever someone is hypothermic, especially up here in Alaska in the winter, it's definitely a life or death situation because the conditions are so harsh and the help is so far away. It's kind of scary.
The individual swam in the water to the shore, no dry suit. Just assume that he has sufficient cold weather clothing, though. 2 hours ago, he said he was going to make a fire.
The idea of starting a fire is a great idea, but you have to maintain that fire. Where do you get all the wood? And anytime you have to move away from the fire, you're obviously going to cool down again. And there might come that point where you just can't move anymore.
Any idea what the shoreline looks like in that area? I can't tell off these charts.
I'm AST-1C Fisher. I'm a rescue swimmer here at Air Station Kodiak. The weather was good getting there. It was a relatively quick flight, about 45 minutes an hour. We continue to get reports from sector and from the fishing boat that was out searching for him.
Go ahead, Dr. Seldovia. I just talked to the guy that's stranded on the beach on the cell phone. He doesn't really know where he's at, but he is
All right, yeah, so that area is really, really short. As we come around the tip of the peninsula there, basically a shoreline search for 3 miles. Roger.
The plan for him was to get a fire going that was going to help us as far as our night vision goggles and the FLIR that I was using to see at night. It would pick that up real quick.
We got the cell phone with him. He's up in the woods, away from the beach. He did not get a fire made.
If he didn't get a fire started, and it's been 2 hours, the hypothermia caught up with him, he could be in a pretty severe condition.
Let's go ahead, that's from Philadelphia. I just talked to the guy that stranded on the beach on the cell phone. He doesn't really know where he's at, but he is north of Poughkeepsie.
Basically a shoreline search for 3 miles.
The report was a gentleman had flipped his skiff and had to swim to shore. We continue to get reports from the fishing boat that was out searching for him.
We got the cell phone with him. He's up in the woods, away from the beach. He did not get a fire made.
If he didn't get a fire started, and it's been 2 hours, the hypothermia caught up with him, he could be in a pretty severe condition.
You start to lose mobility, you start to think crazy as you get hypothermic. He was on the edge to where it could go bad in a short amount of time.
Helicopter, Philadelphia.
I'm assuming you hear all this, Steve?
Yes, sir.
His feet are frozen. What would be great is to get word to him that if he has any kind of source of light, he needs to make it happen when he hears us. Say, hey, we got night vision goggles, we can see a Flint 10 miles away.
Yeah, Roger.
When we arrived on scene, we had some very good conditions and were able to use our IR camera to really search the beach. So we just did a fast pass kind of through that track line area, but didn't see a boat at all.
Helicopter, Philadelphia. Talking to Kelly on the phone right now. Keep your flight along the coast there. He said he saw you a few minutes ago, but he doesn't see you now.
Yeah, go back.
We just got the end of his cell phone battery there.
The fishing vessel passed along that at some point we had passed by. He had heard us pass nearby his location and go in the other direction. So we were able to turn around and head back.
It looks like there's something on the beach down there. I got something on the beach down there.
You think it's a person or you think it's a boat?
It looks like a person.
Let me know when you have door speed too, sir. We do have door speed, but you can hold on, not just to get a little closer, not freeze yourself to death.
There's something down there in the sand moving around. Oh, what is that, a damn sea lion?
In this case, as we flew by, picked up a heat signature on the beach. You saw the trail in the sand where it looked like it was crawling down towards the water. And after zooming in, found out that it was a sea otter. So we continued the search at that point.
Is this his boat right here? Right in the middle of my searchlight?
Yep, that's it.
So the assumption is that he's near his boat, right?
He's up on the bench in the tree line.
If we land near the boat, and then we can just go out and look for him.
Okay.
When we overflew the skiff sitting on the beach, we figured that's a good starting point, and the plan was to land near the skiff, tell Steve Fisher, our rescue swimmer, to go down out, and maybe look for some tracks, follow some tracks in the snow to wherever he's located, or maybe just start yelling.
We're going to go down, we're going to land, you get out, and we're probably going to fly away so you guys can yell at each other.
Roger.
Go ahead and get the door open if it's not open already.
Your cabin door is open.
Oh, there's the boat.
Ease forward. Hold.
AMT-2 Nick Davenport, Air Station Kodiak, H-60 flight back. We came across the boat, so we flew over and used the infrared camera to see if we could find them. We couldn't find them, so we landed about 100 yards away from the boat.
Left main's on deck. Right main's on deck. Go check out that boat, see what that looks like. Maybe you can follow his tracks.
Roger.
We'll fly away to give you a little bit of better sense of hearing.
We knew at that point from the fishing vessel that he was communicating with that his cell phone had died. I figured I'd walk down the beach towards the skiff, hopefully find his tracks, follow them up into the woods.
You can fire up that tracker beam too. Yes, sir.
He was walking down the shore calling out for the gentleman. We're sitting on deck. We pulled up the OIR in front and searched further down the beach.
Preview, take out section complete.
Coming up.
I see him on the EOIR.
You see the guy? You see Steve or the survivor?
Could have swore I saw somebody else. They tried to stand up and fell down.
Yeah, that's him right there. crawling. All right, call him on the radio.
We immediately knew the guy was in trouble. Since he was Army-style crawling on the beach, every now and then he would come to a stop and get up on his knees and try to wave. I think he was afraid that we didn't see him because it was so dark and the aircraft was probably a quarter mile away that he was afraid we're going to fly off.
Are they there yet?
No, they got a ways to go.
I had a flashlight with me kind of scanning the area. The pilots contacted me and told me that it looked as if down towards where the skiff was, there was an individual crawling down the beach waving.
All right, Nick, get out there and help him. Yep, I got the backboard.
Went out there to assist the swimmer in bringing him back. The pilots flashed their lights and said we wanted to move a little bit closer so it'd be less of a transit to carry the survivor.
It's a long way to carry that guy.
Yeah. We're just going to come up to like 20 feet an hour taxi.
I think that's a good idea.
As soon as I got to him, I was a little worried about the fact that he was kind of crawling through the snow. I could tell that he didn't have a lot of movement going down his lower body.
Go check out that boat, see what that looks like. Maybe you can follow his tracks.
Roger.
The call came in about a stranded individual on the beach up near Soldovia. We learned that he had been out there for at least a couple of hours. When we saw him on the IR camera, we immediately knew the guy was in trouble.
All right, Nick, get out there and help him. Yep, I got the backboard.
He had two what appeared to be sweatshirts wrapped around his feet. I asked him if I helped him, could he walk? He said he didn't think he could walk. And given the fact he didn't have any shoes on and we were in the snow, we opted to have the helicopter land as close as possible without the rotor wash hitting us with rocks and sand.
They want us to move a little bit closer. Yeah, but I didn't want to blow him too much. That was the problem.
He was cold and shivering, but he had kind of a tough mentality, like he was all right, just, you know, go ahead and get him out of there. He wasn't panicked. He was just visibly shaking, and you could tell by his hands and feet that the couple hours he'd been out there had kind of taken their toll.
Full 90%.
The beach was in really bad shape. It had a lot of little rivers going through it and rocks and ice and debris. And so it was definitely difficult transiting with him on the backboard, and he probably weighed 250 pounds.
All right, how we doing?
We got him in a hypothermic bag.
Okay.
Inside the cabin, we got a swimmer and myself. Roger. All right, we're all clear for takeoff.
Depending on how far along the hypothermia is, that's what dictates what type of medical care you give him. In this case, even though they weren't survival, the clothing he was wearing was keeping him warm enough. He was starting to shiver pretty bad, and given the fact that his hands and feet were exposed, if he had been out there throughout the night, given the fact that he couldn't make a fire and with his hands he couldn't really make an adequate shelter, he would have been in serious emergency.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to find out what made him flip over.
He said he was out there fishing and the engine died. But the engine died, he kind of steered it towards shore and rode the waves in. And then as the boat grounded, it was in like breaking waves. As he was getting out of the boat to get to shore, that's when he got wet.
Okay. All right, before line checkers, can you see the runway?
I believe I see that string of lights just off the nose.
Yeah, it's kind of left to right a little bit.
Yep.
We transported him from there to Homer. It was about a 10-minute flight. Weather en route was great. Couldn't have asked for better weather. Arrived in Homer and transferred him to the awaiting ambulance.
Got him out of the plane and onto the gurney, and he sat up and shook the swimmer's hand and shook my hand, and it was a true, sincere thank you. And all the training and all that kind of stuff, and it all gets put together at that point. It really makes you feel pretty good.
It was a good night for everybody. We were able to safely execute the mission, retrieve the survivor, get him to higher care, and return safely to Kodiak.
Good job, everybody.
It is the perfect case. The guy is alive today because of Team Coast Guard.
Steve and Nick, you guys saved that man's life. We all did.
My name's Kelly Brennan, and I'm from Halibut Cove. About 2 o'clock on a nice afternoon, I left out of Seldovia Bay in my skiff to go catch a codfish. I stopped to jig for a little while, and there wasn't anything there, so I hauled back and started to move. Outboard wouldn't start. Kind of crash landed on the beach. I called Stephanie, my friend in Seldovia, told her, don't call the Coast Guard, come get me in the morning, because I didn't think I was going to need the help. I was brought up to don't do it unless you really do need them.
You know, I started assessing the gravity of the situation, which was pretty bad. And I figured, okay, if we get on the Seldovia, they have bright lights, because he said, you just look for my skiff, and I'm just up, you know, up the bluff from my skiff.
So I wasn't worried about it, but I got cold faster than I thought. I couldn't stand up, and I couldn't hold anything.
I was out on the deck looking on shore and couldn't see anything. I mean, even with those lights. And then all of a sudden, I get a phone call from him. And he said, my feet are frozen. I started panicking, and I said, look, I'm gonna talk to the Coast Guard. I thought that that was really the only hope we had to get him back, because there was no way that we could do anything.
And I heard the helicopter, and just a moment later, I could see the lights through the trees, and I knew that they couldn't see me. And I got a little frantic. I kind of got up on my knees and did some yelling, and I didn't know if they could hear me or not, but I went for it, yes. I was getting desperate. There's no doubt in my mind at all that I would not be here if those guys hadn't shown up when they did. No doubt at all.
All right, I think we've got most of the players here. Is that correct? Everybody look around. We've got most all the crews. How many of you in here have not done cliff ops? That's why we do this, okay? And that's why it's such a big evolution. Vertical surface training and cliff ops training is a higher risk evolution because it's not something we do normally. Alaska, we just have a lot more coastline. So with that kind of terrain and that kind of mountainous region, you know, people still get out and enjoy their activities, whether it be surfing, hiking, hunting, whatever it may be. And sometimes they get into problems with that.
He's about 50 feet up the cliff, and there's about another 150 feet above him. I don't even know if we have enough cable to reach him if we went straight down, right?
Yeah, it'd be really tough.
So if we could just get a basket down to him.
Give it a shot.
Basket's about halfway down.
Survivor's getting in the basket.
Wow, dude.
Survivor's coming up.
Nice job, Josh.
Anytime you can increase your capabilities, when we get out in a real situation, someone's life depends on it, we can make a successful outcome.
Party, we are moving into the position that is on the west side of the spruce cape there.
Roger, we now have your guard. SpongeBob's are on the cliff. We are sending the safety observers out now.
We're simulating getting a survivor off a cliff. It's a great training tool. Not a whole lot of units get to do this, and it's awesome for all air crews. Going down, I'll be telling the flight mech with hand signals to go down, to stop, which direction I want to go on the rocks. You don't want to come down right on the survivor because the swimmer can kick rocks down, and also the rotor wash from the plane. If you go directly over him, you could possibly push him off to the cliff. So we want to come up underneath him. That way, if he does lose positive grip, I'll be there to catch him. I'll be putting the quick strap around the survivor and giving him the ready for pickup and signaling him off the cliff. As a swimmer, I do like doing it. We always like to do it a couple times every year just to keep brushed up on all the skills. It's a pretty good benefit to being in Kodiak.
This is a difficult environment for everyone inside the aircraft. When you're talking about pilots, you're having to deal with the burbles and you're having to deal with the wind shears and all the different characteristics of that. The flight mechanic He's conning pilots over top of a cliff face, and he's looking straight down, and he's trying to give some verbal commands to get them in the proper position, all the while maintaining the rescue swimmer maintains positive contact with the cliff and not rubbing the cable. So this ups the ante a little bit across the board for everybody. That's huge, and that typically pays dividend to the people that need it the most, and that's the people in danger. So it's always a great thing to get that done.
Received a call from a lady saying she was in contact with her husband who was hunting up in a mountain, and one member of the party was having a heart attack.
It looks like a person up here. See if we can't get a landing spot, at least get stick out.
It's definitely a very skinny spine. If you fell down either side, it would have been, a catastrophe.
He's up on like one of the highest peaks. My fear would be to blow him off. I think I see him.
We're going somewhat high altitude, so we're just trying to keep it light.
Okay. We received a call via 911 from a lady calling in via sat phone saying she was in contact with her husband who was hunting up in a mountain, and her husband was saying that one member of the party was, they thought, having a heart attack.
And was there 205? Roger. And prepare for takeoff? Ready for takeoff.
Right here is Kodiak, where we're based off of. The weather today is gorgeous, so we're going to be sending them down to Hidden Basin, which is this little loop here at the end of Kodiak Bay. The lady I'm talking to via sat phone is in a house somewhere down in this area. I think they're on top of either this point here, this mountain up here, or this area right in for here. So we're sending the 60 to look in that area for a hunting party. Anybody signaling looking like they're in trouble. And then they'll fly right back and hopefully meet the ambulance.
We didn't have a very specific location, so we got in the plane. We knew it was in the vicinity of Dead Man's Bay, which is a bay off of Kodiak, which is to the southwest of the air station. It's a relatively short flight. And since it was a beautiful day, we climbed up over the top and went direct over the top of the mountains.
Kodiak Air, 6005, airborne.
6005, Mayor Roger. I've got a couple of rough positions for you.
Roger, good sending.
This is right in our backyard. We got 5, 6, 7, 8,000 foot mountains. We train for vertical surface and high altitude flying and stuff like that. So, I mean, we've pretty much prepared for everything that we can fly to.
And the last bit of information is I've got them working to see if they can figure out some way to signal you. If nothing else, they're on channel 16, but they have a weak battery.
16 weak battery, Roger. Thanks.
And right now, we're just trying to find a way for the people on the ground to talk to a helicopter, to signal the helicopter to see if they can find out exactly where they are and recover the person.
Hey guys, make sure you clear your ears. We're climbing up. Roger. We'll put the second position in here. Let's put channel 16 in there. Roger.
Once we arrived on scene, we came up on channel 16, which is the frequency we knew he was going to be on. Made contact with him. We set up our direction finding equipment on the aircraft and told him to key the radio a couple times so we could get a position, a location.
He's like up on like one of the highest peaks. Just hit basin or out the nose here, so. So I guess get clarification, is he in the basin or is he up on a mountain? The position he gave us are up on a mountain.
He told us that he was on one of the highest peaks overlooking Dead Man's Bay. Narrowed it down to 2 peaks. We weren't quite sure which one it was. And once we got in general vicinity, it was just a matter of using our eyes outside the cockpit to look for him on the mountain ridge.
So this one and the one next over there, so.
We had heard from the flight surgeon that he had like a pacemaker or internal defibrillator of some sort that was shocking him. So we knew that he was probably going to be not ambulatory.
I think I see him. I don't know. I bet they're up on this little ridge right up here. Yeah, it looks like a person up here.
I was kind of surprised. I believe they're at around 2,700 feet, which was a lot higher than I expected them to be since they had a defibrillator on them.
All right, guys, I think he's on this ridge here on the right. I want to get down slow. Roger.
The survivor was on a ridge line, and the ridge line was about 10 feet wide, so there was no room for us to land anywhere near him to bring him on board.
Vic, you gonna be able to climb on that ridge line okay?
Yeah, right where they're at.
Shouldn't have a problem.
It's definitely a very skinny spine. If you fell down either side, it would have been, a catastrophe.
They're down here on this little valley. Holy, it's going to be tight. My fear would be to blow him off. So I think maybe put Nick down where he can hike there over to him.
I like that idea.
You can feel the effects of significant rotor wash from this aircraft down to 300 feet below the helicopter. So to be directly in the rotor wash is akin to being in a Category 2 hurricane. So obviously it's a very narrow ridge. They're up around 2,500 feet with sheer drop-offs on each side. We don't want to take a risk of blowing somebody.
All right, guys, I'm going to fly along this ridge line almost at eye level so we get a good eye of what the terrain looks like. Roger.
Just circled around a couple times. Had everybody looking out the door just to kind of talk through it, figure out a game plan where we're going to approach to, whether we're going to hoist or land.
See if we can't get a landing spot, at least get Nick out, and then we can evaluate whether we want to hoist or land again.
We found one spot that was just big enough for the landing gear to sit down in. Had a couple rocks that we were going to keep our eyes on.
These two rocks here, Nick, just come underneath the tail. Can we put the tail between those?
Yes, sir. And easy right. Easy right.
I'm looking for the tires, make sure they're landed on flat ground and not sinking or anything like that, and make sure nothing punctures the bottom of the aircraft. Looking at the tail to make sure the tail's not going to contact anything.
Thinking you might be able to just get Nick out, just put him where you can walk down.
Okay.
Got over the area and I calmed the plane down into the spot that was very, very small.
Nick, make sure you watch that rotor arc coming out.
Roger.
I don't know if that's really going to work for Nick either.
You can just hunker down or we can just take off.
Left main is still up. Easy down.
There's rocks and things that could stick into the bottom of the aircraft. Looking for the tires, make sure they're landed on flat ground and not sinking or anything like that.
Tail's on deck. Right main is on deck.
Just hop out right here.
Roger that.
Roger.
Coming out front.
Sight.
And he's clear.
Roger.
We're not going to be able to carry him or have him walk the way I just came.
Anytime you're dealing with a cardiac patient and you have to hoist up, as an EMT, it's something you definitely need to be concerned with.
We also need to be somewhat high so we're not blowing around too much down there.
It was definitely the highest hoist that I've ever done.
Airline's connected to hoist up. Best is going outdoors.
All right, guys, I'm going to fly along this ridge line almost at eye level so we get a good eye of what the terrain looks like.
An alarm went off. A hunter in distress in the vicinity of Dead Man's Bay. The ridge that he was on was kind of a knife edge type of ridge. It was very narrow, very high. In the end, we determined that in order for the swimmer to do a determination of his condition, we had to get him on the ground.
Tail's on deck. Left main is still up.
Just hop out right here. Nick, make sure you watch that rotor arc coming out.
Roger that.
We found a place where we could get the aircraft on the ground instead of hoisting him, which is typically a more risky maneuver.
And he's clear.
Roger.
So I jumped off and got down and let them take off. And then I climbed up a ridge and back down into a little saddle to where he was at.
Okay, I'm talking to him now. We're not going to be able to carry him or have him walk the way I just came.
Roger, so understand you're recommending a basket recovery?
Yeah, that's affirmative.
We also need to be somewhat high so we're not blowing around too much down there. We'll come in for a somewhat higher hover. It's going to be basket recovery of the patient. Then we'll drop the trail line down later and pick up Nick with a bear hook.
Rescue checklist complete. Ready for one basket delivery with trail line to a spot on the mountain.
Begin hoist.
Trail line's going outdoors. Trail line's going down. Trail line's halfway down. Trail line is 5 feet off the ground holding.
Roger.
Easy forward and right. Easy forward and right. Trail line's connected to hoist up. Best is going outdoors.
Anytime you're dealing with a cardiac patient and you have to hoist up, as an EMT, it's something you definitely need to be concerned with. Hanging on from a cable and being hoisted, it's definitely a nerve-wracking experience.
Prepare, take load, take the load. Best is clear to ground. Clear to move easy back and left.
What I try to do when we're on the ground is explain to them exactly what's happening, tell them how proficient our pilots and our flight mechs are, and hopefully that gives them a little bit of warm and fuzzy before they go up.
Driver's inside the cabin. Ready for one bear hook recovery, the rest of the one.
Roger.
It was definitely the highest hoist that I've ever done. About 105 feet from the top of the ridge. You know, not a whole lot of people say they've done that one.
Cabin doors closed.
We get into the helo, and I go right into patient assessment, putting O2 on the patient, and then getting his O2 stats and his pulse rate. I know that our transit's 4 to 6 minutes, so I keep him right in the basket and set up for landing. It's a great feeling to be able to help him out. You know, I feel bad that he wasn't able to get his goat. You know, it's a once-in-a-lifetime kind of hunt there. But it's definitely something he'll always remember, and definitely something I'll always remember. So overall, I'm glad everything turned out well.
My name's Ron Monk. I'm in Kodiak hunting goat. Sunday morning, we were dropped off on the boat, across the basin, and started up the mountain. It was a pretty good hike. I have a pacemaker and internal defibrillator. It regulates my heartbeat in case of a irregular rhythm to chuck my heart back into rhythm. It kind of feels like touching an electric fence or something. It's like being brought to your knees by the shock over and over again.
How you doing?
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
It was a relief to see you guys coming.
How's everything going?
So far, so good. Looks like I'm gonna be okay.
It's good to hear.
Tom Combs. Tom
Thanks,
Combs.
Tom.
That's me.
Michelle, he was
Thank
the one
you.
on the rig.
You know what the thing is, you know, you watch the show and you never think one day it's gonna happen to you, you know, and here comes the Coast Guard like, wow, this is incredible.
I'm glad everything worked out well for you. You guys want to take a look at the helicopter, you're welcome.
Without the Coast Guard, I don't think that I would be here talking to you today. I can't say enough about those guys that go out and put their life to help other people. You know, I can't thank them enough.